I found myself in a buried place, an underground place, and there were these beings that were kind of wormlike or something like that, large, or my size, and seemed to be intelligent beings, but most of their limbs were totally atrophied from just being in this one underground place for generations and generations and generations. And they could communicate.
Welcome back. I'm here again with Lynn Buchanan. Lynn, welcome back.
Thank you very much. I really enjoy talking to you. I always do. Yeah.
I enjoy talking to you too, and I think the audience loves seeing you. We got to keep you out in the limelight for as long as possible. So, all right. This particular episode, we're going to talk about some of the strangest targets you were assigned. Interpret that however you want to interpret, because you've told me about some strange targets, right?
We had some weird ones. Yeah, we do weird.
All right, let's go. Let's get started.
Yeah. Weird is part of our portfolio. Yeah. Well, for the military, let's see. I think probably the weirdest one was there was a task. I don't know whether it was a practice target or an assigned target, because we were never always told about that. Mm-hmm. I kind of felt that it was an assigned target, but I wasn't sure. It was to view one of the moons of Saturn. And what I got was an extremely frozen place. I didn't know that was the target. They said it's a location, describe it and anything going on there. And
is that Europa?
I mean, I think it may have been.
I'll confirm while you keep talking.
Okay. And it was a absolutely frozen cold place, very high humidity, oppressive air. And there was this dark place, kind of like an opening in one of the mountains, almost like a cave or something.
By the way, I was wrong. Europa is a moon of Jupiter. I'm probably thinking of Titan. Titan is a moon of Saturn.
I think
that's the one with the methane and.
Oh yeah. Okay. And there were two beings there, and they were having a conversation. And so anytime there's something like that in a remote viewing session, I will tune in. And one of the phenomena of the controlled remote viewing is that your subconscious will interpret meanings. So no matter what the language, you still get the meaning. And this was so alien that there was no way to interpret any meaning. I saw the conversation going on, and all I knew was this is the most alien thing I've ever seen. I mean, you know, in CRV, you can get, the meaning, animals talking to each other, animals communicating. There was just no, and I stayed as long as I could in the session, but what I wound up reporting was I found two aliens in a strange frozen environment, and they were discussing something, and I have no idea what. And I think that was one of the weirdest sessions I ever had.
What did they look like?
It was in darkness. I couldn't see them, but they were very large and bulky. I could see kind of silhouettes. And they were very large and bulky. They were not human-shaped at all. I've never experienced anything that alien, I've never experienced anything that non-human ever in any session.
To advertise on Through Glass Darkly, Email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
Do you have a sense for or speculation on why they sent you to look at that target specifically?
No, I just took the tasking, and it was only later that I found out where the target was. It was only at feedback time I found out where the target was. Yeah,
Do you know who the client was? Like which
I
agency?
don't.
Or
We were rarely ever told.
okay, interesting. What other strange targets have you?
Uh, a lot of strange targets were mainly the ones I can mainly talk about were the ones that were practice targets. We got a lot of targets where what we found did not match the recorded history. History is written by the
Victors.
victors, yeah. And doing research, we found out that probably a lot of it was more accurate than the recorded history from different aspects looking at it. But quite a few odd things. Strange got to be kind of normal, and it quit feeling strange. So when you ask for the strangest things, it's kind of hard to think back on things because things that somebody else might think extremely strange, we were getting as just another day at work. Different technologies that we found, different things. There was one, I think you already know about, the particle beam weapon that the Russians were developing. Where
I don't think
they,
you told me that story. Tell me more about
oh, really?
that.
Yeah, the Russians were developing a particle beam weapon, extremely powerful particle beam weapon. And this was a task thing, some client wanted to know basically what was happening inside the beam. Well, even the Russians couldn't stick a probe into the beam because it would just, the probe would be gone immediately, just disintegrated. And so they wanted to know what was going on inside the beam. And so somebody had the brilliant idea of let's stick a remote viewer in there. And so on that one, they did tell us, this could be a dangerous thing and ask for volunteers. And I thought that'd be neat. And so I volunteered for it. And they didn't tell us it was a weapon, a particle beam weapon. They just said there's a weapon. And so in the session, I got into session. I found myself standing in sort of an open field, and there was this long, straight, round thing that was sort of chocolate covered to me. And my monitor said, well, approach it. And I approached it, and it made this zappy humming sound and all that, and said, well, step inside of it. So I stepped inside of it, and all of a sudden, time and everything just went totally weird. I could look toward one and see myself in sort of the future. I looked the other way and saw myself in the past. And the minute I realized that, all of a sudden I was back in the beam at my time. And then I would look around and I saw swirling, and probably the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. Just indescribable colors, patterns, and everything else. I mean, it was indescribably beautiful. And it wasn't until long after the session that I found out that I had stepped into a particle beam weapon. So, but you talk about fantastically beautiful experience, and time kept warping in and out. And I could see my past self, my future self, myself in a stream of time. And it was an amazing experience. It really was. And the beauty of it was just, I mean, I still can't describe it. It's fantastically beautiful.
Where was this particle beam and what part of Russia?
I was in Semipalatinsk, Russia. I found out later. Yeah.
All right, that is pretty weird. What other weird?
Yeah. But it was a neat experience. Yeah. Just other weird things, all of a sudden, well, the first PSI experience I ever had, perfect site integration. Perfect site integration in controlled remote viewing is where the focus of your conscious mind is so focused on what your subconscious is giving that you don't pick up the senses of the world around you, what's in front of you, the table you're sitting at, or anything like that. Your entire experience comes from your subconscious mind. And at that point, in a controlled remote viewing experience, you cannot tell that you're not at the target. Everything is as real as what's around you right now, and it becomes completely real to you. And I found myself in a buried place, in an underground place, and there were these beings that were kind of wormlike or something like that, large, very my size, and seemed to be intelligent beings, but most of their limbs were totally atrophied from just being in this one underground place for generations and generations and generations. And they could communicate, but I hadn't had the PSI experience, the perfect site integrations experience yet. I was just perceiving this. And so my monitor said, well, look around, tell me what you see. And I said, well, I see some, looks like stairs going up. And he said, okay, go up the stairs, see what you get. I went up there, and all of a sudden, the PSI experience clicked in. And I was standing in this hallway. And when I do my remote viewing, I always take my shoes off. It's a habit. I have no idea why. It's just a quirk, And I was standing there barefoot in some sand in this long hallway. And down at the end of the hallway, there was an opening. So I walked down to the opening and leaned out, and I was way up high over this desert that had all these eroded hills and mountains and everything else out in the distance. The sky was dark, but it was daylight, and it was a strange color. And the sun was out, though, but it was cold. The wind was cold. The wind smelled sour, sort of soured, And I leaned out of the opening. It was open, I leaned out of the opening and looked at the building I was in, and it sloped back and was all eroded and everything else. And so this was the first time I'd ever had the PSI experience. And so I leaned back in, and I was looking out and sort of memorizing where everything was. And all of a sudden, my conscious mind clicked in, and I said, what the hell? And I was back at the table just like that. And so that's when I found out that I had been tasked. Well, later I found out that I had been tasked with the Sedona region of Mars. And at that time, the face on Mars and all that, that was
D&M
not put
pyramid
out
and all that stuff.
that was not put out to the public. That was still classified. And I guess maybe 6 months later, we were at a facility out in California, and they had a picture of the Sedona region on the wall. And I looked at it, and they said, yeah, that's a picture of Mars. And I could see this face, and this mountain, eroded mountain that looked like a face. And so I got up close to the picture and looked. And there on this one sloping area, there was a dot on the hillside where there was an opening. And I looked at the surrounding things, and everything was right where I had seen them. And I realized, oh, really? Mentally, I walked on Mars. And the PSI experience will give you a quandary. And that quandary is, if I walk across the room and it's real, and I remember walking across the room because it is real. If I mentally walk across Mars and it is realistic at the time, then did I actually walk across on Mars? Physically, absolutely not. But I've had the experience of walking across the sands of Mars, and, I've had that real experience of doing that. And so the quandary comes in, what really is reality to your mind, And so anyway, that was one of the most pleasant experiences that I've had, I think, when you talk about weird. But after you get to the point where you can habitually almost have the PSI experience, it becomes an accepted thing. And one time I had a PSI experience of riding around a small town in Switzerland. And as I did, this was after I'd learned in the PSI experience to pop out, record, pop back in. And I had listed the street names as we drove by them, which sent to National Geographic, got a map of that little town in Switzerland. And I had missed one of the street names, but I got the others. And so did I ride around in Switzerland reading the street names as I went? What's reality here? And so, this is weird as far as the normal person is concerned. But once you get to where you're doing the controlled remote viewing and you find out the things that the human mind is capable of, the weird starts becoming kind of natural, kind of normal. It's not weird anymore. It's just another thing you do. Yeah.
Any of these remote viewing sessions terrify you?
No, I've never had one that terrified me, but one of the things you learn in controlled remote viewing is to protect yourself. This is a big part of the English Swan training, to protect yourself as a viewer. You observe, you don't get involved. And so you can see horrific things, and you have the experience of seeing and experiencing, witnessing a horrific thing. And you never get over that experience. But you don't personally get yourself involved in it. And so it's almost like watching murder after murder on TV, movie or something.
What other strange experiences have you had?
Oh, some really neat ones, experiencing things like there is an annual thing in Russia. This was a practice target, okay? And one that I've given to other people too, but my students. There is an annual event in Russia where people inflate these nude women balloons, the nude, whatever those are, and float down the river on them as rafts and hanging onto this nude woman balloon. And it's a big race that they have over there in Russia. And so I experienced hanging onto this nude balloon, and floating down the river. And fun. Oh, it was fun. Everybody was laughing and everything else. It was pretty neat. Yeah.
But that was a blind target. So when you were doing that,
It was a blind target. I had
you're
no
like,
idea.
what the hell is this? Was it like a joke somebody kind of gave you?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, we'd give all kinds of practice targets to people. One of the things about the training of CRB, you find a lot of trainers that give you the Eiffel Tower, things like that, a spoon of sitting on a plate, and I mean, all this other crap. And if you throw targets at people that are totally unexpected, my students call them Lynn targets because they never know what to expect. For one thing, they are interesting to the subconscious mind. It's a totally new experience. And people who take my training learn things about the world in these practice targets that they never even knew existed, that they can't predict. And they find it interesting. They find the practice to be interesting. I'm sorry, but, the Eiffel Tower, what a yawn fest. I mean, you got a tower there, big deal. Or a spoon on a plate. I know one time there was a person who said, we're going to judge everybody according to their training and experience. And so I said, okay, I was all these years as a military remote viewer and trainer and all that. So they gave me one according to my experience. It was a piece of broccoli on a plate. And it was, I had the AOL, the analytic overlay, that they're going to give me a complex target. And so I described this tree-like thing on a flat white surface. Then I thought, that can't be it. And so I started making up stuff. And in the end, I totally ruined my session, because I was just thinking, well, that can't be it. I've got to find something else, And, what people normally give as targets for training are not challenging at best,
This is very specific. I assume the answer is no, but I'm going to ask anyway. Have you ever given anybody the target of the Epstein Ranch or Epstein Island or anything like that?
No, I haven't. And I refuse to give unsettling targets to my students. I'm not there to give them training in how to deal with bad things. I'm giving them training in how to use the tools of remote viewing. And so I try to make it to where when they use the correct tools, they get a pleasant experience that will teach them to continue using the tools.
Have you ever done any targets that look at like portals in the desert Southwest or anything weird like that?
Some, but the problem with that is there's no feedback. And so I will give things like that to advanced students and future targets to advanced students. But not future targets are going to happen 20 years from now. Future targets that will happen next week. So we'll get feedback. It's in the feedback for a session that you learn how you did. And so I always try to give people targets that will cause them to use one of the tools and get practice in using the tools, and will also be a rewarding experience for when they do. I know a lot of people give things like, well, one trainer gives as a regular thing, experience your own death. I'm sorry, but you're not going to be there to get feedback. You're just
You
not.
might when you're on the other side, right?
Maybe so, but that's who wants. I'm sorry, but you don't give that to beginning students. And people give 9/11 and the Kennedy assassination and all this other stuff. Don't give those. Give pleasant targets that will be rewarding and that will let them specifically use a certain tool that you're trying to teach them how to use. And so I customize my training toward the needs of the student and the tools that they need to use, giving them things, horrific things. That only makes them not want to remote view anymore. And so now in the advanced courses where people are going to start taking tasking from police and military and all that, by that time, we've taught them all the tools of self-protection, how to observe without getting involved. And by that time, then we can start training them toward those kind of targets. A lot of people say, I want to learn remote viewing so that I can help bring home missing kids. And they have this idealistic thing about it. But you get to remote viewing and you access a kid who has been abused, killed, the body has been chopped up and buried in 10 different places, and you're not prepared to protect yourself from that. Oh, listen, when people say that, I always tell them, hey, you got to prepare yourself for what's coming, and that can take years of training. So get rid of the flowers and all that, expectations.
I think at the very beginning you talked about remote viewing historical situations that turned out not to have been. Do you have any examples of that?
History is written by the victors. There have been a lot of times when in the civilian arena, people are writing history books, have called and said, hey, would you look at this event and tell me what really happened and all that? And we find things. I got a call one time, and the person said, well, I'm not going to pollute you. And so the front loading I have is why? That was it. So I did the session, and what I found was these people walking along a path toward what looked like a city, and there were people walking back. And then later in that session, I saw the same people walking back out of the city and nobody coming. And so I went ahead and did the full session, and the only answer I got was because they didn't have money. That was the answer to why. And so when the customer called back, I said, here's what I got. I told them, all the things I'd seen, but I said, here's what I got. The answer to why is because they didn't have any money. And so he blew it off. About 2 years later, I got a call from that same person, and he said, what did you mean by they didn't have money? And I said, they didn't have money. He said, do you mean they were broke? I said, no, they weren't broke. They didn't have money. It was like they paid their dues to the government by service. And, if the government fails, you don't have money. And, well, if the government fails, you're not going to show up for service. And he said, I've been studying and I think you were right. And I said, well, what was the target? He said, why did the Aztec cities or the Mayan cities empty out overnight? It's because they weren't cities. They were places where everybody went to give their service. like 2 weeks later, they went home back to their farms and all that. When the government fell, nobody came the next time.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't cities that emptied out. It was places of service where people just stopped coming. And he said, I think you were right. So anyway, things like that where historians are always looking at things on a rock and saying, oh, that's religious or something like that, and they put modern interpretations to ancient things that they find. And that's what we've done with the Mayans and all that. And very possibly, there's no proof, but it sounds very logical. They did not have money. The Mayans and the Aztecs, they didn't have money. And their dues to the government was in service. So when the government fell, everybody stayed on their farms, stayed at home, and didn't come anymore.
What other instances of history?
We did a whole lot of things about future things, what's going to happen in Granada, and we predicted that. And the reports of what happened differ from what actually happened, but that's always the case. What the press reports is never the truth.
Right.
Yeah.
Was the situation better or worse than what actually was reported?
The end result was the same. Yeah.
Anything outside of Granada? Other?
Oh, yeah, a lot of other things, but most of what we did in the military has been declassified.
But not all.
But I'm never sure exactly what and what hasn't been. And so I'm always very careful not to talk about, like, I know that Granada has been declassified, okay, but other things like that, if I talk about it and give a location that says the U.S. spied on this location, and that's not something, that's not something that should be known. Yeah. And of course, we spy on every location spies on us, but to come out and say it, you don't do that to the public.
Have you done any sessions when you were in the military where you were, you did talk about the 4 bases in a previous interview, but any other
ET bases? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any other targets where you were looking at non-human intelligences on Earth?
A few, yeah, but of course, we never got feedback. So to say that we were correct when there's no feedback, okay, what you have to fall back on is the database that shows your track record.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one thing that CRV does, the CRV that I teach does. We database all of your work so that we know when you give me a color, I know you're 90% correct. So I'm going to put faith in what you say. When you give me, let's say, the shape of something, you're maybe 10% correct according to your track record. So I'm gonna get me another remote viewer and maybe find out more about it than you tell me. And in doing that, we can form teams and task each one toward their strength and come out with 90% accuracy, something like that, on everything, simply by knowing their accuracy rate. And on those targets where there's no feedback, in order to get a dependability rating on it, you have to look in the database at the strengths and weaknesses of each viewer. And so now there was one where this was after the military, right after I got out of the military, I got this task from a person who said, there's a location, describe the location. And that was it. And I found just sand, rocks, and all that. And this scoop that was sticking up out of the sand. A scoop. And sent it back. Never got any answer or anything like that. And just, it was 12 years later, that person sent me a picture from the Mars rover of a place. I've still got the picture somewhere of a place on Mars where it took a picture, and there's the sand and the rocks, and there is a scoop sticking up out of the sand. And it was there. But it took me 12 years to get feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, 17 years for Ingo when he predicted what was going to happen, when the probe went into Jupiter, Saturn. Which one was it?
I think it's Jupiter, because he predicted that Jupiter had rings too.
Yeah.
Right.
And he predicted exactly what was going to happen. And 17 years later, he got the feedback. Yeah. But it's in the practice targets. This is one of the reasons why I don't give a spoon sitting on a plate or something like that, because we database things. I give them real targets that we're going to have feedback on immediately. And that way I can say, you said it was this color. Were you right or wrong, or can't feedback? You said it was this shape. Do you right or wrong? And we database everything. And when you take the training that I give, the other CRV trainers don't always use the database, but use the database. But when you take the training I get, we database your work. We know your strengths and weaknesses. When we find your weaknesses, I can customize your training to help you strengthen your weaknesses. I can also tell people, hey, you're strong in this. Go ahead and take real world tasking in this, but don't take tasking in the things you're weak at, because you'll be wrong, And so that way this gets people working faster, and it helps the students. Many of my students, I find, are great at helping the other students. I make a community. They're great at helping the other students, and those I will pick out and train them to be trainers. And as a result, I have a lot of my students who are now doing their own training over in Ireland, Italy, Canada, and so forth, and doing a good job of training CRV. So that's what I'm interested in.
Any final words for the audience?
No, I think the final word I would say is that you should look into this stuff, because what we're actually teaching is some of the things that the human mind is fully capable of doing that everybody's been ignoring all this time, And the minute it got attached to the word psychic, oh, you're going to go to hell, Hey, if God gave you an ability, I think the sin is in not using it.
Mm-hmm.
Because He gave it to us to protect ourselves and, and to plan for the future and to create the future. So I think if you have the ability and you have the intuition, as far as the church is concerned, I think it's a sin not to use it. My personal opinion. So I would say at least look into it without fear. Okay, don't be afraid of it. Quit being afraid of things. Look into it. There's a lot of scientific research behind it. Take a look.
All right, my friend. Always a pleasure. Thank you again.
Good talking to you.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.